The job market in the European Union has taken a hammering during the coronavirus pandemic. It was, of course, an inevitable part of the required lockdowns, but we have to avoid a lost generation. We need a good future for the young generation, and this is a top priority for the EPP Group in the European Parliament. Today we'll be talking about how to secure jobs through a fast economic recovery and to bounce back post-pandemic. Good afternoon to everyone watching online to our Jobs, Jobs, Jobs event coming to you live from the European Parliament in Brussels. My name is Esther de Lange. I'm a Vice Chairwoman of the EPP Group in the European Parliament, and I'm very pleased to be joined today by Richard Quest, CNN Business Editor-at-Large and anchor, of course, of Quest Means Business. Richard.
Good morning to you, Esther. Good morning from New York, where it is just 8:15 in the morning and the new day has begun. We are here today. Please join in the discussion. There are a variety of ways that you can also take part, for instance, via YouTube, Twitter or Facebook. I'd like you to use the hashtag jobs when you tweet or when you make your Instagram posts or you do your Facebook post. Hashtag jobs. Let's see if we can get that trending around the world. Today's event comes in three distinct parts. There are two panels, and they will be bisected by several keynote speeches, including ones from the Greek Prime Minister and from the President of the European Commission. I think it's worth saying, Esther, that one of the reasons that you and I are here is, besides sort of to get people from A to B and to move things along, the EPP wanted to make sure this wasn't just going to be pap and blablum and the usual blah, blah, blah. The jobs crisis in the post-pandemic world is the most serious issue after the health crisis. And the EPP was determined that those joining us today will give real context to what needs to be done so that we don't have a lost generation and, more importantly, arguably, we reach European potential. So, Esther, that is the framework upon which we'll have these two panels on the economic effects and creating jobs. Lovely to be with you, Esther.
Yes, and it's a pleasure to be with you, Richard, and indeed real context, but real answers, hopefully, today as well. So let's start. Now, we've got COVID-19 vaccines rolling out across Europe. The European Parliament has just given its approval to the €750 billion recovery fund to support EU economies in pulling themselves out of the pandemic. But as we rebuild the livelihoods of European Union citizens, there needs to be a clear plan, and we need to make sure the jobs we're creating are European, are green, and are sustainable. And the COVID-19 crisis, we know, unfortunately, has hit young European people disproportionately. And while they should be enjoying the most formative, and let me say for my own experience, the most exciting years of their lives, many students, unfortunately, are struggling to make ends meet. And their job prospects after schooling are uncertain. And member states must act now and come up with tailored schemes for the retention and creation of jobs for students and young people. And we know that at a European level, 22 billion is available for youth from EU funds. But more importantly, let's hear from some young Europeans on how they have been affected.
I'm Matteo, I'm 22 years old, and I'm originally from Genova, Italy, but I've been living in Berlin for more than a year now.
My name's Katie, I'm from Dublin originally, and I was working in the hospitality industry in Berlin. Well, I lost my job because of the COVID crisis. In the back of my mind, I'm questioning, whether I should continue working in that industry, and maybe I should consider other job prospects in the future.
After I graduated, one of the reasons why I decided not to start the master right after was definitely because of coronavirus and because of the restricted options that I would have had. Many students are struggling right now because they don't really know, for example, when they will be able to graduate, what direction they want to give to their studies, and obviously the job offers are also limited.
My biggest fear is that there will be no support for me. I was lucky enough to have some savings available to me, but they have quickly diminished, and I think now I would rely on the kind of support given by the government. But I think a lot of people weren't in the same position as I was in terms of having any savings, so I think there are a lot of people struggling at the moment.
I am fearful, definitely, about the future, in the sense that I do know that eventually this situation will get better, but from an economical point of view, I'm not so sure and I'm not so positive about it. I am afraid that even in a couple of years, the situation will still gonna be very bad, especially for students or recent graduates or in general young people.
Yeah, I think now I'm living a little bit more in the present and focusing on what I'm doing now and where I'm getting my income from and what my job prospects are. Future has been put on hold a little bit. What I would like to hear from politicians is just the, affirmation that we aren't alone in this pandemic and that there is support for us and that not all hope is lost.
I do think young people need to hear from politicians that they are also doing something for us. For example, like in Italy, a new government has been appointed over 2 weeks ago, and the new prime minister has, during his speech in front of the Senate, has talked about young people. I think that we need to hear from politicians from the European Union, the European Commission, and also national governments that they're doing something also for us. That the economic recovery plans in the future are going to involve policies for young people, directly for young people, to help them get into the labor market and to help them provide for themselves during the university studies, for example, because I do feel that investing in young generations is a very important investment in the future.
Chair of the Executive Board and Deputy CEO of the Merck Group, the German chemicals and pharmaceuticals company, and Dagmar Schuller, the CEO of Odiering, an exciting EU software company working with artificial intelligence. They're going to be commenting on how they see the various aspects of where we are and, more importantly, what they need. Let's talk first of all to Roberto Colonnino from Piaggio, who's joining us today. The increasing competitiveness in your motor vehicle industry at a time of economic disruption, but you also have a new prime minister in Italy committed to economic and structural reform. So, where are you in the business and what do you need now?
Well, if we look the problems of the automotive sector is not only a temporary issue to the problems with the production of vehicles. It's more profound than that is make. And I'm thinking about the role of mobility. Mobility, my need is to cover distance, going from one point to other points. Evolution has led us to move with our legs, then animals, then petroleum burning vehicle, etc., etc. Now mobility in the sense of vehicle moving is calling into question not only the role of remote working, but also the revolution of the distribution of goods, autonomous system, the redesign of city with the rebirth of native-born, the role of pedestrians are shaping this change. I believe, in my opinion, that this, to thinking about the design of the city, is very important for our sector in the future. As Piaggio, the evolution of a human race in space that happens also through innovation is what we pay attention to. The evolution is given by the need to live sustainably and not to put it in a simply question of adaptation. Or we are developed to biological capability or living in an even more contaminated and saturated planet, or we reduce emission and we improve the quality of our city and planet. This also means having to get used to different lifestyle and having different expectations. I have to be able to propose and accept this evolution, and as Piaggio with innovation, I have to respond to this concept. At the job level, it means that the role, position, and skill must also be suitable for managing the necessary innovation. So in other words, what I think that when we look at the future, we need to be much more entrepreneur of ourselves than before. Nothing is right. Nothing is decided. The life in the future is something that we are able to believe or what will be the life in the future. And we need to move in that way, to rethinking to our position, to change our traditional life, and to be ready to accept a new concept, a new situation, and to accept the future not in a negative way, but in a positive way. We have to gain the future. We not to be submit at the future. We need to be able to manage the future.
Right. That question of we need to be able to attack or to be with the future. Roberto, before we move on, just quickly, we've got to give people hope that they've not been forgotten. How do we do that?
Well, the world is becoming more and smaller space. The innovation push to the world to become a small country. It's not anymore a big country. The more is like a small city where we are obliged everybody to move, where we are obliged to accept everybody the other opinion, and we have to be able to analyze that our future life depends for the concept of everybody that can work together to reach one goal.
With that in mind, thank you, sir. With that in mind, stay with us. Belen Garijo joins me from Merck, the Merck Group, on how we can use. I mean, we look at Merck, Doctor, and we see obviously the announcement yesterday of the work that you're doing with others in the United States, and we see the central role that you've had during the pandemic in many ways. But if you look at what you now need, bearing in mind you're going to hear from the President of the Commission, the head of the EPP and the Prime Minister of Greece, what is it you want? What is it you need now to create that environment that will allow you to create more jobs?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very, very much for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here. Let me first clarify that the announcement of yesterday doesn't relate to our MEP company, but to MSD, the other MEP. And to frame that, let me perhaps use 1 minute to share with the audience who we are, because we are a globally diversified science and technology company that was founded back in 1668, more than 350 years ago. That was only shortly after the 30 Years' War has ended in Europe. And actually, MSD emerged out of the expropriation of our interest in the US at the time after the First World War. So we are MEP, based in Germany, and I am speaking to all of you from our global headquarters in Darmstadt. What do we need from politicians? What do we need? How do we engage with each other to continue to emerge stronger after this crisis? I see 3 major areas of interest in this context. First of all, we need to really put time and resources to strengthen our structural basis by getting very serious about healthcare. This is very, very important. 2, we need to increase our focus on innovation made in Europe. And 3, no matter how big the challenges are, we need to address this together. Exactly as we have been doing during the crisis, we have been working together to fight this crisis. We can later discuss what are the contributions of the industry in this respect. But it is important that we start prioritizing health, including and beyond the threats of a pandemic. In our case, we have been going through this in a very, very active, with a very active participation and contribution. We have focused quite a lot on keeping our employees engaged. We have, by the way, made a commitment to keep employment worldwide during the crisis, and obviously we will continue to honor that commitment towards our workforce. But going back to the 3 points, for too long, health risks have been commonly referred to as non-traditional threats to our regional security. Not least, COVID-19 has demonstrated how closely economic development and European stability is linked to health issues. We are talking about an effect that goes far beyond the impact of the coronavirus. According to different studies, health issues depress global GDP by about 15% per year. In turn, every euro that we invest on health could pay off 2 to 4 times over. So the establishment of the Health Emergency Preparedness and Response Authority, the so-called HERA, by the European Union is an important step to draw the right lessons from the pandemic. And for us, the new authorities should be embedded in the existing EU research and innovation ecosystem and keeping strong ties to other international agencies such as the European Medicines Agency, WHO, or BARDA.
Thank you, Doctor. My apologies for the confusion at the beginning. Schoolboy error on my part, taken from reading the newspapers this morning, and a momentary of weakness before coffee. So I fully take on that part. Before we go to Dagmar Schuler, who's standing by, I just want to know, the same question that I gave to Roberto. I worry that the policies and the bureaucracy somewhat mask the opportunity for giving optimism to a younger generation that's now basically been told for the last 12 months and will be for longer, lockdowns, problems and job losses. That's a concern.
That is obviously a concern that we share with all the policymakers within Europe. And we, as a very strong industry, can be a very strong partner to find solutions together. I already mentioned that we have been extremely active during the pandemic. We have committed to keep the employment in our company. We have 60,000 employees around the world working in research, manufacturing, and of course, around the major contribution that we are making to vaccine manufacturers. We are collaborating with more than 50 vaccines manufacturers at this stage. We have actually raised our workforce to keep our supply chain intact and to be able to accelerate the pace at which we supply critical materials and instruments to the vaccine manufacturers. So even if we are not if we don't have to do with the announcement of yesterday, we have a few weeks ago announced that we are collaborating very closely with our neighbor BioNTech to provide critical materials to the manufacturing of the mRNA vaccines. And we firmly believe in that technology, and that which goes beyond vaccine and can be a potential solution to treat cancer and many autoimmune diseases.
Doctor, thank you. I appreciate it, your time. Now, we've talked about two industries that come from the traditional sides, automotive and pharmaceuticals and biosciences. And now let's talk about the artificial intelligence and the machine learning side of it. There you see Dagmar Schuler, the CEO of Ordering, a company of Cutting Edge. Now, we were already heading towards digitization before the pandemic. The one thing we know, Dagmar, is that the pandemic accelerated that. So we were facing job losses as a result of digitization before the new jobs had fully been formed. Where do we go now, and what do you look for from policymakers, please?
So thank you very much also from my end. Thank you very much for the invitation and for the nice comment at the very beginning about the exciting technology that we are using here. And yes, indeed, digitalization, information technology, data is a very exciting thing. And I am on the contrary side. I would not say, for example, that digitalization is killing jobs or making them less available. It is quite the contrary. Digitalization, if you view it on a broader basis, generates a lot of jobs that have not been available, not even been present about a decade ago. I'll give you a practical example. I always like to give practical examples. So, for example, in my company, we have a very, very important position that is called the head of data intelligence. The head of data intelligence has a team that is looking after generating quality data and getting quality data in order to train our algorithms. And that's not only gathering the data, but segmenting the data, annotating the data, labeling the data. And there is a lot of processes and steps associated with this type of job. And what I think with regards to the generation of the jobs is also that digitalization or technology that we are talking about here allows especially that monotonous jobs are moved more or less to machines. However, creativity is actually a talent that is sought after very much, especially through digitalization.
Can I just interrupt you, Dagmar, because you raise a valid point there, that digitization, to use your words, can create jobs on a broader basis. but I worry that in the shorter term, that broader basis, what do we do to give your industry the encouragement it needs to create more of those jobs sooner?
I would say, honestly, there's just one word associated with that: trust. I think in Europe, we especially do not trust ourselves and these disruptive technologies in a way that we should, because it is already at a point where it is reliable, sustainable, and secure. And I think we need to embrace the possibilities that are alongside coming with this new technology much more, and also generate this type of trust within the people, so that they can see and actually evaluate the possibilities, chances, but also the risks that are associated with it. Actually, for those things, we need two very important points that we need to address here. For the trust, you always need knowledge. So this type of information with regarding like simply programming or any type of technology related subjects have to be vitally interpreted in the educational system. This also does not only mean that the people understand, or the scholars understand more about the technology, but they can also use it, which then leads on to their future professional life, where they can implement what they've learned. And secondly, we need to be a little bit more flexible and trust ourselves a little bit more with regards to data. We tend to over-regulate things in that area that actually prohibits us from utilizing it for the benefit of the people. That does not mean that the data protection is out of question, or that security or any type of negative aspect is targeted here, but there is technology already available that actually secures what the fear is. But I think it needs to be more understood that data is the new oil. In my, for example, in my domain where we do intelligent audio analysis, I can say, I sometimes really put it that way, is the speech the new blood for medical analysis, for example, because it provides you with an infinite amount of information. And for that, I need, of course, a lot of data to be able to most excessively analyze, but also have accurate systems for the special definition. So when it comes back to the jobs, yes?
We need to leave it there, unfortunately. Thank you, Dagmar, Ursula, joining us. Data is the new oil. There's an entire discussion point on that, particularly the question of what changes need to be made to GDPR. That's a discussion for another day, which we could talk about. Dagmar, thank you. And to our panel, thank you. Before we go to Esther, who is going to take the questions from the various members with us, let's look at a video from Pablo Casado, the president of Partido Popular in Spain.
Next generation's future is in our hands today. The economic recovery is not only about money, it's also about the people. Job creation is the vaccine against the crisis, the safeguard of social welfare, and the alternative to populism. We need to use the recovery fund to implement reforms and to create long-term jobs. The digital revolution and the fight against climate change should be our best allies to conquer a better future for Europe.
Indeed, so now we take some questions, first of all, from the audience before I move to the members of the European Parliament. We have Hans on Facebook asking how many jobs can you create in Europe, and may I add also for young people, when Europe becomes leading in personalized medicine? This is to Belén Garrigo. Of course, personalized medicine, a lot to say about that. We don't have a lot of time, but a very concrete question to you, Ms. Garrigo. How many jobs can you create for our young people in Europe if we really succeed in going in the direction of personalized medicine?
First of all, let me tell you that personalized medicine is a reality of today. There are many, many personalized medicines that are commercialized already to treat chronic diseases like cancer, autoimmune diseases, etc. So it's a reality of today. And this has changed the way we operate our research to boost what we call translational medicine. And in the last 5 to 10 years, we have created tremendous opportunities for young scientists and researchers to join our scientific teams to help us early find what we call a biomarker. So the tool that will help us identify what are the patients that could benefit from a therapy in a specific disease. This is very well implemented, and actually data and the increasing use of data and digital technologies are helping us advance much further into now trying to understand how far can we take personalized medicine. So an ongoing journey, many jobs have been created. Our company in particular have pioneered the area of biomarkers. We have several cancer therapies already commercialized and helping many, many patients around the world to selectively benefit from those personalized therapies. And we will continue to fully establish, and of course, this is bringing tremendous opportunities to scientists, researchers, but don't forget also for engineers, data experts, and data scientists who are as important as the scientists to help us progress.
Definitely opportunities there. What struck me in the contribution of the head of Piaggio was when he was asked about the future of mobility, he started about the design of cities. He started to talk about that. So it's clear that we might need some out-of-the-box thinking as well when it comes to the future of our key industries in Europe. And we have a question from Giorgio on Instagram, who is worried about how we can kind of keep the good of the past when we move into the future. He asked, Vespa is one of the best examples of good design and excellent technique in Europe. Of course, we know that, and we're proud of a brand like Vespa. Will this remain important in the future and in the European economy? So design, technique, but what else is needed for a company like Piaggio? I would like to ask to Roberto Colaninno.
Well, look, this question is a question that we put on ourselves every morning. Why do people have to buy one of our products? And to be able to respond to this question, automatically you resolve the problem also of the job creation. If we are not able to satisfy the customer, we are not able to create a new job. Now, what we have done in Piaggio in this year, number one, we are very proud about this. We have gone through the pandemic situation without to fire no one. And now we hire new 500 people to develop plan of this year and the next year. How we do this? Number one, internationalization of the project. Number two, to be global and to be present in a big market around the world. And we are set to go in Vietnam, India, and China, not before to transfer production from Italy to another country because salary is more cheaper, because general situation is more easy, but only because we are to be close to that market, and we go through another, and if we go in the other country, just because we are able to maximize our presence in the world. And if we are able to maximize the presence in the world, automatically we increase also our presence in the European market. And the other way, we are able to increase our job in our factory in Europe. Naturally, what we hope will happen in the future. Will happen that the people understand that the market is not anymore one country or one city. It's a big area, it's a big market. And we compete with the market of China, we compete with the market of ASEAN, we compete the market of Mercosur, and we compete with the market of United States. So we need to compete in the market that is Europe. It's not Italy only. So we need that the mentality of the people had to be changed and to be open to the multilaterality, than to be one country and one with the philosophy of sovereignty. We don't need that. We need to be open. We need to be not to be able to compete, just be as able to utilize people at lower cost, a lower condition. But only because if we work together, we are able to satisfy what the customer needs. What we are done in this year in Piaggio is every year we create problem to ourselves, because through new problems, if we are able to growing. And the first problem that we have, to solve is to be able to live with the other people, not to compete with other people. We find.
Very important. Thank you very much, and very clear. Think global and be European. And I think especially our younger viewers will say here, we are European and we're eager to go. I think I'm turning now to questions from members of the European Parliament. Colleagues, may I ask you to clearly say your name for our audience, but also to say who you are addressing the question to. So to whom in the panel your question is addressed. And I will start with my colleague and friend, Massimiliano Salini. Massimiliano.
Hi, Hester. Thank you so much. And thank you for, in particular, to Mr. Roberto Colaninno. I'm from Italy, and specifically I'm from Cremona, really close to Mantova, where Mr. Colaninno is. And my question for Mr. Colaninno is in particular about the recovery and about the Next Generation EU, because never in the past an amount like the one decided in the Next Generation EU has been negotiated. And we know very well, in particular, our figures in Italy in terms of GDP and of unemployment. And then I know very well also the figures of Piaggio. Fantastic figures in 2020 and probably also in 2021. My question for Mr. Colaninno is, how do you see the combination of the recovery together with the ambitions of the EU Green Deal? And secondly, you spoke about innovation. Well, could you tell us more about this point in the Piaggio Industrial Plan? Thank you so much.
I want to underline one concept. We consider innovation only if the innovation is something that is used by everybody. If it's just a question of technology results for ourselves that don't have any value. Started from this concept, innovation is connected with the evolution of the people. You cannot have innovation if you don't have evolution also of the people. Today, the evolution is research, is technology, but also to be able to accept what is the condition where we live. The general condition where we live no need only financial help given us only because we need. We need to have finance, but we need also to have the right investment to make this financial help. So only if we are able to make a plan of investments, but more than that, if we know exactly how be back with that investments for the future program. So in other terms, in Italy, for me, it seems that many colleagues and enterprise want money only because the business was no good in the last year. This, I understand this. but the business will be good in the future. And if we want to be good in the future, we need to have a plan for the future. And the plan in the future is mainly built by young people. So we need to trust and to help young people to be able to utilize these investments and to utilize this money for their future. And for their future is to understand what is the future. If the future is I need to be green, I need to be able to have no more the situation of the pandemic, what the pandemic have created in the past. Just for these two questions, to these two goals, what means that behind to this, we have thousands and thousands of new jobs. But obviously, we have to gain this job. We cannot to pretend the job for free. Cannot pretend the job only because I am young. I have to be young, but I have also the need and the right to be young is also the need to be understand what I have to do in the future to be able to pay back what we receive today.
Thank you very much. I think that's a very clear message also for the young people in Europe watching. Angelika Niebler from Bavaria. A quick one, Angelika, with a view to the time. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much, East, and thanks to our speakers for their great contributions. So I'd like to address a question to Mrs. Dagmar Schuller because she talked about data. All is about data. So my question is, what do we have to do in Europe to build up a data economy? What do we have to do that, data spaces are going to be built up in the European Union? What are the obstacles? What are the framework you need? You mentioned trust, you mentioned flexibility. In your contribution, you talked about getting rid of over-regulation. My question is that all, or what do we have to do in order really to go for an environment, an ecosystem, so that industry can deliver jobs? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Niebler. So what we definitely need here is especially trust centers and quality centers that allow us with regards to, first of all, assessing the quality of data, because the quality of data is directly linked to the quality of the models and the accuracies that the models or algorithms actually can be produce. Also, we need to have qualities and trust in the interlink of the set of data and the models, so that, for example, it has to be open, in my opinion, to show what type of test set, what type of trainings test, at least the key performance indicators are available. And if this type of measurement can be deployed by a company, and if they have a secure way of actually deploying this type of technology, they should be allowed to utilize the data in a more broader way, because then it is a very secure thing. So my necessity here would be very clearly those companies that have the technology that can provide you with the security of the data in that way and the quality, and that are open for this type of transparency, those ones should actually have access to a certain amount of data. And if one, so to speak, also generate a lot of data in a certain trust center, let's say, for example, in association with the coronavirus, that they have researched or gathered certain data and they're making this data public in a way that, for example, certain characteristics or fingerprints of data can be addressed or assessed by a lot of other companies, those type of actions should be incentivized, because it is an enormous effort to generate this type of data. And if a company sets up this type of money to actually have this data and makes it available for future and other researchers, it actually should be having the possibility to actually generate something out of that as well. Also, what we need with this respect is a little bit more flexibility in the structural process. So what we so far do not actually have is that even if we ask for a lot of consent with regards to data, I'm especially talking or referring here to personal data, not machine data, we should allow ourselves that this consent is really true. that if somebody will provide me with his or her data, they really want it and not actually think they do not want it. So our current regulations or systems have a lot of burdens and hurdles that, especially for startup companies or for scale-up companies, are very, very hard to overcome. There are very innovative companies out there that actually struggle with this hurdle so much that a lot of them cannot provide the jobs that are necessary or cannot grow at the pace where they would then generate the jobs. So we need to find a middle way, not compromising the security or protection of the data, but allowing those who meet the standards to actually have access to what they need.
I was just checking there if you could hear me, because I tried to interrupt 2 times, but you did very well, Dagmar Schüller, to get all the information in that you wanted at the speed of light. I had the impression you couldn't even hear me there. What is very clear is that data, trust in data, access to data are key ingredients for what you need as a startup company. I think that's also some homework for us, dear colleagues, when it comes to reviewing our data legislation in the European Union. But that's for us here in Brussels. Over to you, Richard.
Esther, before I let you go, you know, we have a reality issue here. There's a difference between what we're talking about. I'm in New York, where it's now coming up to 9 a.m. I'm working from home, and the internet is already starting to break up, crap out and fall apart as everybody goes online working from home. So let me apologize, Esther, if I suddenly freeze for a few seconds, and then I come back in 15 or 20 seconds after that.
I will assume it's not a medical issue then, Richard.
No. Well, you'll know that if that happens, that will be a completely different type of event.
That was Richard and me joking there about the internet connection actually breaking down, which it then did. So this shows us that you should never really jinx these things. What we will do now is to take a look at how SMEs, very important to the EPP, are faring and what they need to boost job growth. And we're going to do that with Czech MEP Ivan Štefanec, who's our president of SME Europe of the EPP Group. And afterwards, we will immediately go to our second panel.
Every year we get a number of European tourists, so Italy being a huge one, Germany being a massive one, and France. You know, they'd arrive on buses here, coach loads of them, so maybe 40 in a group. So I suppose this year was a huge shock, and certainly we had to realise that our 30,000 visitors, our nice comfy, 30,000 visitors that we could depend on every year wasn't going to be a thing.
De switch van restaurant naar volledige bezorging, dat was eigenlijk een switch die we relatief makkelijk konden maken. We hebben met de tweede lockdown besloten om de bezorging volledig naar onszelf toe te trekken. Eigen bezorgers in dienst te nemen, eigen elektrische fietsen aan te schaffen. Deels om de kwaliteit aan de deur te kunnen garanderen en ten tweede om een mooi marketingplaatje op straat te hebben door eigen bezorgers rond te hebben rijden. Aan de andere kant zijn wij bezig geweest met het opzetten van Vincenzo's Frozen. Pizza's die wij in het restaurant afbakken in de houtoven en vervolgens invriezen en eigenlijk aanbieden aan consumenten en partnerrestaurants. Waardoor we een extra inkomensstroom hebben kunnen genereren, welke niet afhankelijk is van het restaurant zelf. Door de snelle switch die we hebben kunnen maken, hebben we iedereen aan het werk kunnen houden. Dan wel in de keuken, dan wel op de vloer, dan wel op de fiets voor de bezorging.
European small businesses, many of them family-owned, have been heavily affected by this COVID crisis. Before the pandemic, they employed 2/3 of the European workforce and they've created 80% of new jobs in last 5 years. Nowadays, more than half of them facing bankruptcy. If we don't help them to survive the crisis, we will be challenged by raising unemployment and families whose livelihoods have been put at risk. The EPP has surveyed European small businesses to find out what they need, and these are our findings. Firstly, they need quick access to finance, either in the form of government grants or bank loans. Secondly, they need a delay in taxes to give them much needed breathing space and a reform to tax policy to encourage new investments and new jobs. And thirdly, last but not least, they need a reduction of bureaucratic burden on companies, particularly in accessing funding. In long term, we also need to complete the single market and make EU funds work for the future via massive and decisive investments in infrastructure, digital change, education, and research.
Welcome back to this EPP Group event on jobs, where we're talking about future-proofing Europe's economy in order to get jobs, especially for young people. We have Jack Parrott now standing in for Richard Quest temporarily. So, Jack, floor is yours.
Hi, Esther. Yeah, so we've lost Richard Quest, so I'm going to jump in here to co-host this event with you. So, as we know, we've been talking about jobs so far. We're going to move on with this event now to start discussing with the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, I believe. Esther, do you know if she's coming up with us now straight away?
I think Jack will be speaking to our EPP Group Chairman, Manfred Weber, here first. He's with us in the studio. Thank you so much, Manfred Weber, of course, for taking the initiative for organizing this event. I think it's really important that also in Corona times we reach out to people, and we do so now as EPP Group in the digital way. And Manfred, can you tell us why are jobs? It's your motto here: jobs, jobs, jobs. Why is it so important? Why is it top priority for the EPP Group?
Well, Esther, you know that for us as an EPP Group, it's a joint effort, a team effort, that we are prioritizing now the new aspect of jobs, jobs, jobs for 21. I want to reflect, probably I want to answer the question why, probably the personal reflection, because I still have in mind when I did a campaign in Europe, like we all did in the last elections, I was in Portugal, I was in Porto, together with Lydia Pereira, our YEP leader. And we were sitting together with a round of young Europeans, young Portuguese people, and we discussed about the impact of the economic crisis 12 years ago, about the euro, about the cuts there and all these things. And the young generation, the young people told me and explained in their private life, in their daily life, how negative the impact of this lost generation framing was. And that was shocking. That was an extremely negative experience to see that the young generation cannot build up a future, establish a family, to build up their own house and so on, invest into the future. Therefore, you need economic certainty and stability. And that is the motivation why we do it. We can also argue with figures, you know, about the decline of the European GDP in last year. We also see that China is having growth last year, and we had around 7% minus last year. So it's also about the global power game, though that is a more general, let me say, arguments why we think that jobs, jobs, jobs must be the top issue for 2021. So that is our motivation. That's why we need to do so. Let me say it in this way. The health crisis is now in the center, but we have a good chance that we can manage it. We can overcome it in the next month with vaccination. But the economic crisis will stay, and that's why our main priority. From an EPP point of view, you know, and we work together a lot on the ideas, what are the main basic messages now. One of the main messages, first of all, we need in this economic crisis now investments. That's clear. And let me also refer to the economic crisis 12 years ago. Today, nobody is responsible for COVID. Nobody is responsible for COVID. That's why I think it's important that we have not, first of all, the budgetary perspective about discipline. It's first of all about investment, and that is good. The 715 billion investment now is a key element in this regard. And I also want to underline that it is proposed by EPP. So Ursula von der Leyen proposed it. She will be with us in a minute. Angela Merkel, a lot of council members, Kyriakos, who is with us, supported this. We in the parliament made it possible with our legislative work. So I think it's an EPP approach to go to investments. But I want to underline that there are some criteria. First of all, we need this money really invested in future, not consumption. We need really investment, future investments, probably even some flagship project like e-charging for cars or the question of hydrogen network in the European Union. So I think that must be clear, investment in the future. And the second thing is that we clearly insist that this money must be linked to reforms. If you get money, if you get solidarity in Europe, you have to take over your responsibility. And there, Italy, for example, with Draghi is now really a perspective of hope, of a reform perspective for the country. But in Spain, for example, we have some doubts. Pablo was with us today in this short video. So that's why we have to be clear on this to implement this in the correct way. Another point is what we want to underline is to strengthen the single market. In the last 30 years, the single market was the growth engine of the European Union. So we managed that with the opening of borders, of border controls in Europe, we created jobs and growth. And that is what we can repeat with the digital. In the last days, Angela Merkel, together with some female prime ministers and governmental leaders, presented an initiative for more digital reforms. And I want to offer a fast-track procedure. So Angelika Niebler is our main rapporteur in this field. We can speed up to implement this because that is then creating the base for the digital revolution in Europe. And Green Deal, I want to be also clear that we are committed to the targets, no doubt about this. But we have to implement things with industry, with jobs, and not against them. That is the big question in this field ahead of us. On the third point I want to mention, how to create now jobs, is about trade. In the last 5 years, we did a lot on trade, about Japan, for example, the CETA initiative with Canada. So we did a lot in this aspect. And now I feel that we are losing the momentum. When it is about Mercosur, we are waiting for the French elections. When we speak about China, we don't have the momentum anymore to go further with this. That's why I think it is important to speed up. We cannot have growth in Europe without benefiting from those who have big growth rates, enormous growth rates on global level. The fourth point I want to mention is research. I think that is clear. It was already discussed a minute ago. I want to criticize our council members. Kyriakos, I don't know whether he's already connected, because council cut again the research money. And at Parliament, we fought again for increasing the budget line for research, having in mind that after the corona crisis, the companies have less capital to invest, to do research. The state must invest more, and that's why this is important. And finally, having these fields where we have to be active now in mind, I think still red tape is an issue. I know it's a boring exercise because we speak since decades about red tape, but it's still important, having in mind that we have the absorption rate of the regional fund money in the European Union is low because we have so much bureaucratic burden established that it has to be lifted, and we have to create freedom for our companies to invest. There are some fields where we want to be active, Esther, where we want to go forward. And let me finalize my introduction to say that this has a lot to do with the future of Europe as a whole, because if we cannot give economic growth, if we cannot promise to the young generation that they can keep the status of today's living status in the European Union, if we cannot promise a good future, a better world, like in the past, it was always a promise that we can live in a better world. If we cannot keep this promise, then it opens the doors for Trumpists and for populists, and then it's damaging the European idea. That's why jobs is really key for 21.
That's why it's fundamental. So now let's thank you very much, Manfred Weber, and let's now hear from the leading lady of the European Commission in charge of many of these areas. Jack, over to you.
Thank you, Manfred Weber, the EPP Group leader. Now we're going to move on to the European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. Thank you so much for joining us on our Jobs event, President. So we've got a pretty fundamental, straightforward question for you. How does the Commission make sure that a jobs crisis doesn't follow the health crisis?
Well, thank you very much, Jack. These are indeed important questions. And first of all, hello to Chairman Weber, lieber Manfred, and all those who are watching. Esther, good to see you too. Indeed, as Manfred said, by now it's basically, what did he say? Health crisis is central. So the pandemic has held Europe in its grip for almost a year. That's true. And we should not forget it is a year in which things like homeschooling and the home office have become the new normal for many of us. It has been a year in which entrepreneurs and the owners of small and medium-sized businesses have used all their creativity, as we've seen in the video, to keep our economy running. And it was the year in which workers of all ages have shown a lot of resilience despite all lockdowns and despite all curfews. But I must also state that today many of them are worried that the economic and social scars of this pandemic will be felt for a long time. And even after the virus has been defeated, they fear for that, and I understand their fears. And I must say, I will do all I can to address them, and that's what I want to talk about. So this conference on jobs for a strong recovery could not come at a better time. Indeed, just a few hours ago, we discussed in college our action plan for the European Pillar of Social Rights, and EASE, that is our recommendation to member states on job creation. And with both of these, we clearly set our ambition for a, as you said, Manfred, social and fair and job-rich recovery. Because while last year we fought to cushion the impact of the pandemic on businesses and to keep people employed, this year will be all about, you're absolutely right, a recovery that creates new jobs. And of course it will be about equipping people with the skills that they need for these jobs. And therefore I thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to explain how we want to address this. So what Europeans expect is quite simple, in normal times and in times like now. They want to know that their hard work will be rewarded. They want to know that if they study and innovate, they will be given every opportunity to succeed. And this is what Europe's social market economy has always been about. It is this right mix of free enterprise and fair competition, of opportunities to converge upwards, and of social protection in times of need. And this is exactly what Europe needs now too. And I'm sure that the EPP Group will fully agree with me. So let me be very clear at the very beginning. In our social market economy, creating jobs is not the task of the state. Creating jobs is for our entrepreneurs or for our small and medium-sized businesses, and of course for our big companies. And the EPP has always been proud to live according to this conviction. But member states, and of course we at the European level, can assist and enhance and support these efforts. And this is exactly what we are doing. So let me start with EASE. EASE stands for Effective Active Support to Employment. And with EASE, the Commission is recommending that member states focus now on easing the transition from the crisis job support we had to creating sustainable and future-proof jobs. And this can be done through a combination of incentives, for example, incentives to hire young people, or incentives for upskilling and reskilling for all age groups, and of course, through support to entrepreneurs. And there are also plenty of other possibilities, for example, grants for startups, or subsidy schemes for apprenticeships, or tailored support for people entering the labor market for the first time. So all these is active labor market policies, and all these actions, these are actions that member states should pursue. And I want to emphasize another point, and Manfred, you mentioned it. Europe's recovery is about its next generation. And therefore, EASE has a very strong focus on young people, because they are among the hardest hit in this crisis. I mean, it feels as if a whole year has been stolen from them. If we look at the numbers today, 18% of young people in Europe are without a job. And we will never accept this, because Europe's future is built on the aspirations and the dreams and the energy of its youth. Beyond active labor policy, there is much more that we can do that generates millions of new jobs. So next month, the Commission will present an update of its industrial strategy. With this, we want to help Europe's industry and its workers to thrive in the green and digital transitions. We also address the specific needs of small and medium-sized enterprises. We have just heard how difficult the situation is in this crisis in the video we've seen. So, for example, with InvestEU, we give guarantees to kickstart investments that our SMEs will benefit from. And most importantly, there is our recovery program, Next Generation EU. Indeed, 750 billion euro. Next Generation EU offers myriad opportunities for companies and for workers. And together with the EU budget, it's actually a budget of 1.8 trillion that we are investing. And this not only helps us to build a better future starting now, it also brings hope for jobs and prosperity to workers and their families. And of course, it will power our SMEs, which are the backbone of our economy. A few examples with this funding. For example, we want to restart the European renovation wave. This is not just about making buildings more energy efficient. It's also, this is important, but it also means an enormous amount of new jobs and new business for our construction sector, for example, which has been hit so badly by the crisis. Or another example. With Next Generation EU, we want to build new hydrogen valleys. And this not only helps businesses like those in the steel industry, for example, on their way to climate neutrality, it also boosts employment, because we know that investment in clean energy creates twice as many jobs as investment in fossil fuels. And with Next Generation EU, we are also, of course, investing heavily in digital projects. I would love to discuss that later on, perhaps in the discussion we will have, or the panel we will have, because this will make Europe, of course, more innovative. It will bring faster internet to schools and business everywhere. It will just create the digital infrastructure we need. And it will create the sustainable and future-oriented jobs that our continent needs. There's another point I want to emphasize. To benefit from these transitions I was briefly mentioning, our citizens need to have the necessary skills. And that brings me back to our action plan on the social pillar. With this, we set ourselves ambitious targets on jobs and skills, and these are clear, measurable goals. We say that by 2030, we want that at least 60% of all adults should participate in upskilling and reskilling every year, so that as many workers as possible get the training they need, so that they are able to thrive in a very evolving working environment. We know that this is coming up. Or another goal we have set ourselves, again, by 2030, we want at least 78% of the adult population to be employed. And this is doable if we raise, for example, the participation of women in the workforce. For that, we need good schools and good childcare. That's crucial for the next generation as well. And my friends know that I am persistent on that topic, because Europe's recovery is for all. Dear friends, this crisis is a marathon, and you have already heard me say that. And while there is hardship and pain, there are also achievements that we can be proud of. Europe decided to stick together against all odds. Together we buy and distribute vaccines for our citizens. Together we agreed on Next Generation EU, the big recovery package. And I'm convinced together we will make sure that our recovery will bring new and sustainable jobs for all. And now I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much for your attention. And back to you, Esther. Or Jack.
Thank you very much, Madam President. It's very interesting to hear what you were saying there about hope, because hope and trust are things that are really important to growing the job market. So we've heard now how Brussels is trying to support SMEs and support countries. Let's now hear about, from the member state perspective. We have with us Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis. Thank you so much for joining us from Athens, Prime Minister. A warm welcome. Thanks for being with us. So your government has successfully led Greece out of a pretty deep depression, and as a consequence of the financial crisis at the end of the last decade. So how are you planning to build jobs post-pandemic?
Thank you very much, Jack, and good afternoon from Athens to Ursula, to Manfred, to Esther. It's a pleasure to participate in this panel. Very, very interesting remarks made by both Manfred and Ursula. Let me just add some thoughts from the national level. First of all, all member states, Greece included, spend a lot of money to make sure that we protected as many jobs as possible during the pandemic. We did it by using various schemes, short-term work schemes, furlough schemes, subsidizing social security contributions. Our goal was always to make sure that we maintain the productive capacity of the economy intact in order for us to be able to restart economic activity once the pandemic is over. And whilst I fully agree with Ursula's remarks that it is not the job of the state to create jobs in normal times, it was and still is the job of the state to protect jobs in abnormal times, such as the ones we are currently experiencing. However, before we talk about new job creation, we need to be very, very careful, and we need to avoid what we call the cliff edge effect, and make sure that we remove the support mechanisms that we have put in place regarding job protection carefully and gradually. And I was happy that it has been agreed that also for 2022, we will invoke the general escape clause regarding budgetary restraints, because it is very clear to me that we cannot move from the current state of play to a normal state of play instantaneously. This needs to happen gradually, because we are all concerned what is going to be the real impact on the jobs market once we start removing the support schemes that we have put in place. I also share Ursula's optimism that we clearly see the end of the tunnel. We do see the light at the end of the tunnel. We're still not absolutely sure how much time we will spend in the tunnel, but the twin impact of mass vaccination really kicking in, combined with the improved weather, makes me quite optimistic that come spring, late spring, early summer, we will be exiting this crisis for good. And because tourism is very important in Greece also for job retention and job creation, I would also like to commend Ursula's comments on the vaccine certification. Let's get this done as quickly as possible in order to facilitate travel post-pandemic. Now, once we leave the pandemic behind, obviously the priority will be to not only make sure that we maintain the existing jobs, but also in the case of Greece, where we still have intrinsic high unemployment, create new sustainable and well-paying jobs in the post-pandemic environment. And there, I would also, from my perspective, like to highlight the importance of the RRF facility for a country such as Greece. Let me just put it in context, in real numbers. What we have agreed at the European level means additional 32 billion euros for Greece over the next 6 years, out of which 19 billion euros is going to be through direct grants, and the balance is going to be through loans, hopefully channeled directly to companies that can actually benefit from them. Now, this has a huge multiplying effect for job creation, especially if you combine it with important reforms that we have already done in order to make the foundations of our economy more competitive. What I would like to point out, dear Manfred, dear Ursula, is that we never stopped doing reforms even during the pandemic. And this was particularly important because we also know that there's not going to be any free money available. To the extent that the Commission has taken the very bold step to borrow money at its level to channel it to member states, we also need to make sure that we keep our end of the bargain and that we reform in order to make our economies more competitive. And we will do it not because it is a Brussels directive to actually move in that direction, but because we fundamentally believe that this is the right thing to do in order to create jobs, especially for young people. So, for example, in Greece, as we speak, we're voting a new public procurement law that takes out, old bureaucratic constraints while fully conforming with the European framework for public procurement. We have made significant simplifications when it comes to licensing. We have lower taxes. We expect Greece to significantly rise in the Doing Business Index. That means that Greece is back on the map in terms of attracting foreign direct investment, which we know is so important in terms of job creation. And some of the initiatives presented by Ursula are also flagship projects within the Greek plan regarding the RRF. Let me just highlight, for example, how important the retrofitting of building is for the Greek economy. This is not just about decreasing our carbon footprint, and we know that old buildings consume a lot of energy. It is about creating jobs in the building materials industry. It's about giving plumbers, electricians, home painters jobs, because they will be the ones that will actually perform these activities. It's also about reducing, at the end of the day, the bill that the households pay, because their houses are going to become more energy efficient. And it's also about technology, because we are making our homes smarter. So there is a clear digital component even in this project. So this is just one example of how we can structure win-win projects with the help of the European Union. Another example is, the sort of the hardcore of decarbonization. How do you get rid of coal-fired electricity plants? We have a region in Greece, Western Macedonia, that was for many decades the heartland of energy production, and it burned dirty coal, lignite. And we took the bold decision to move away from lignite and to shut down these plants as early as possible. So how do you create jobs to replace those jobs in the old coal mines? Well, in the short term, you can create jobs by making sure that you actually reclaim and recover the land that has been used in lignite. But this is not a long-term prospect. We need to attract to this region manufacturing. We need to attract education. We are replacing the old lignite mines with significant investments in renewables, primarily solar. And we're also developing sophisticated agribusiness and tourism in a region of Greece that is not very well known. So, and when you actually add up the numbers, Manfred and Ursula, you realize that you can almost create more jobs this way than having people work in coal mines, which is probably not the sort of jobs we actually want for our youth. But we have to be ambitious, and we have to explain that this can be done and that there is European support in this process. Otherwise, people are going to be to become angry, and they will not buy into our vision. Last point raised by both Manfred and Ursula, which I consider particularly important, the question of skills. Even before the pandemic struck, we knew that we're in the midst of a profound technological transformation that is completely reshaping the future of work. And we know that the concept with which we grew up, you go to school, you get a degree, you get a job, you retire, is probably no longer going to be valid for the next generation. And that we constantly need to learn and update our skills in order to be competitive in a rapidly changing job market. That's why in our RRF plan, the skills component is so important when it comes to upskilling, reskilling, but also certifying new skills. And we want to do it in conjunction with the private sector. Even today in Greece, this may be surprising to you, but this is a country that has 16% unemployment. Yet 30% of the employees tell us that they cannot find the people with the right skills. So there's clearly a fundamental mismatch between what the labor market offers and what companies actually require. Last point of great importance to me, how do you support entrepreneurship? Job creation through business creation. We haven't been particularly good in Europe in creating sort of ecosystems around entrepreneurship with strong venture capital support for R&D. But I think this is beginning to change. And I think it is a very hopeful sign. We certainly see it in Greece, a vibrant ecosystem of startups and of young people who actually want to set up their own companies rather than just be salaried employees. And I think this is particularly important development that needs to be supported both at the national and at the local level. So let me sum up by saying we certainly have our hands full. The pandemic has changed certain things for good, and we will need to adapt. One of them will be the ability to probably work from anywhere year-round, which is probably a comparative advantage for a country such as Greece, provided that we can offer good connectivity and good quality of life. But we need to be fully aware as the EPP that the jobs agenda is the make or break agenda for the next 5 years for our political family. And it is the primary message that will resonate with the younger generation that is viewing this changing labor environment compounded by the pandemic with, I think, as Ursula pointed out, justified concern. And we need to do everything in our ability to make sure that they view the future with the optimism that the younger generation actually deserve.
Sorry to disrupt you there. Thank you so much for that speech. I think it's really interesting. You mentioned there skills, upskilling and reskilling. Also, the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen spoke about that. One of the things with upskilling and reskilling is that it requires motivation and for people to want to be able to do that, to change the way they live. I wonder, Commission President, if you can talk to that. On top of the money, on top of the funds, what does Europe need to do to get the populations motivated to build back the right kind of jobs?
There, the most important part is that we work closely together with employers, employer unions and trade unions, because we saw in the recent years, when you compare and benchmark, for example, successful and less successful active labor market policies, that the schemes, the skilling and upskilling schemes that were mostly on the job were the most successful. So that within the job environment, you, of course, allocate time. And within the job environment, you offer the upskilling or the reskilling that is necessary. And this also goes for people, for example, who are on the verge of losing their job. Even then, those schemes who were the moment when the job is at risk, the employment agency with tailor-made skills programs comes in, the probability to have back-to-back immediately a new job is way higher and way better. This is one of the topics to do that. It is also, if you look at skills training, if you talk to young people, one of the most successful models is the dual vocational training. So where you combine times at school, which are necessary, but nobody really likes, with times where you are in the practical training. If you become a nurse, for example, in the hospital, or if you're in the car industry, you're working already in the car factory. And this combination between having a clear experience on what the future job might be, plus getting the theoretical skills, is the most motivating and the most rewarding, and therefore the most successful, because you were asking about the motivation. And there a lot of different schemes are possible. The principal idea is that if somebody comes being unemployed, the attitude must be, welcome, we have a job for you. And here are the skills that we want to train you on so that you can be successful in the workplace environment. So this is the best approach for motivation.
Thank you, Madam President. So for you, Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, how about what the Commission President was speaking about earlier about diversifying the job market to make sure more women are involved, to make sure there is less discrimination? How, as you as a government, how can you do that?
Well, first of all, let me just add to what Ursula just said. We are proponents of the social market economy, which means that we recognize the need to provide support for those people who are without a job. But we are also keenly aware that if the support mechanism is at some point too generous, then it distorts the real incentives to actually find a job in the first place. So we need to get that balance right, and we need to be able to offer our unemployed real opportunities and real job offers through a careful system of matching the demands of the labor market, coupled with reskilling to tackle the real needs of the market and the unemployed. And this is, and when it comes to incentives, I fundamentally believe that people want to work. This is not just about the money, it's about this concept of dignity of work that we should not forget, and which I think has also been highlighted during the pandemic. And I think we need to do something also at the level of the EPP to recognize all those jobs which were almost invisible, and whose importance we suddenly realized during the pandemic. And the first job that comes to mind is all the young people who are on a scooter and deliver food to our homes, and recognize that these jobs, which may not have received the necessary importance from us, are actually absolutely critical, especially in times of crisis. The question of women participation in the job force is absolutely critical, because we still have a low level of participation of women in Greece. It is about making sure that we literally shatter any concept of discrimination when it comes to pay. It is at the same time also cultural, where more people need to be encouraged to participate in the workforce. It is also a very real issue when it comes to making sure that we need to help, especially women, balance obligations such as making sure that you can raise your children while at the same time having a job. So we've placed a lot of emphasis on making sure that we support nursery and primary care programs in order to make sure expand their work time, to make it easier for women to balance the complicated obligations of having especially young children and holding a job at the same time. So it is an important agenda for us. We will be proposing a very, very bold and broad agenda regarding women participation in the workforce. And we do also hope that we will be able to tackle some of the cultural stereotypes that to a certain extent still exist in our country, but probably belong to the previous century and not the 21st century.
So, Manfred Weber, we just heard from Kyriakos Mitsotakis there, this idea that perhaps, jobs are being viewed in a different way. I wonder if you feel the same, whether there is a sort of new thinking about the different types of jobs and how we make sure that sort of all work is accepted. Have you seen that? Can you see that within the sort of post-pandemic recovery?
Well, the pandemic gives us a clear idea that we should really pay a lot of respect to all contributions. For example, in the healthcare sector, all the nurses who are doing their job are doing a great job, and this is we must pay more respect to this, especially having digitalization, the technological revolution in mind. We also have to face that those who are probably not ready to study, who are not ready to be perfectly educated in our society, are still important for our society. So to keep society together is extremely important. We spoke a lot about education. I must add probably one more critical point, because the young generation is the best educated generation ever, and there we have the biggest problem is unemployment currently. So what is going wrong? That is what we have to reflect, and that's why the main aspect, I fully share the aspect of education and of lifelong learning, but the first and most important thing is how to create now growth. And for our responsibility on European level, let me add one point which is really for me a worrisome development, and then there is the thinking in more bureaucratic answers to these questions, not market-based answers. We believe in ETS, for example, an emission trade system to create the renovation wave, and not so much in a bureaucratic message of that we force everyone to do their investments. I give you another example. I had this week a phone call with a prime minister who told me that with the RRF money, so with the recovery fund money, he is asked to make all investments green investments. Nobody has a problem with this, but when I spoke with him about the details, he told me that he needs an investment in roads towards rural areas where he needs this infrastructure. And then the Commission told him, oh, it's better to build up a cycle path because that is green in a way, to do something for bicycles. So let's not overdo it in a way. Let's not be too bureaucratic in this way. Let's trust in markets. Let's trust in entrepreneurs. They know how to do it. Our job is to create the good network and conditions for this.
Thank you so much. So I'll hand over to Esther shortly to take some questions. But remember, everyone watching online, use the hashtag #JobsJobsJobs if there's anything that any of our panellists or speakers have said that you would like to discuss online. Esther.
Thank you very much, Jack. And of course, while I completely agree with Manfred Weber about letting the market do its job, I think everyone watching from the Brussels bubble would say, yes, please, some more cycle paths in Brussels, because I think we could use them. But let's go to the questions that we're getting from social media. And many of them are about the labour market and how we should find the balance between, on the one hand, flexibility. We get some comments, is it flexible enough? But on the other hand, Andreas Bieger of the German Trade Union Confederation from YouTube, he said, how do you make sure that the recovery is not only digital and green, but also a people's recovery, so that the people really benefit, and especially those in systemically relevant sectors? You already mentioned them, Manfred Weber, health, food delivery, platform workers, care workers. How do you strike, maybe start with you, how do you strike that balance? How do you ensure a people's recovery as well?
Well, I would answer people's recovery means, first of all, jobs. Having the decline of the economy in mind, a lot of people are really concerned. And we have the biggest concern currently in the small, medium enterprises. We have the biggest concern in the backbone of our European economy. That's the industry, the manufacturing industry. That is really there. We have the biggest concern. And that's why we have to care about this, first of all. I'm really fascinated by the idea can we create really this idea of social market economy on European level, because for the moment we have Europe organizing markets, organizing the euro, our currency and so on, but the social things are mainly on national level. How can we bring this together? And when we have people and colleagues from the trade unions with us, I think it is also important to strengthen the trade unions on European level. To be, for example, a company like Volkswagen, they have plants all over Europe. I think to strengthen the trade unions, to defend the interest of the workers towards the business side, because the business side is European-wide, even globally organized, That would be really a strong message into the future, that we strengthen the trade unions as negotiation partner on European level and create a common level playing field on European level.
Very clear. Thank you very much. And when it comes to, for example, the Green Deal, I know that in a member state like the Netherlands, the renovation wave will require a lot of skilled hands, which we don't have at the moment. So that will still also be a big challenge. How do we not only value education, university education, but also skilled workers? Maybe I could ask there also from the European level, the President of the Commission, how do we ensure that we have the skilled hands in Europe to actually enable us to get to our Green Deal ambitions, like, for example, the renovation wave?
Yes. So first of all, what we need is skills programs. And this is embedded in the European Green Deal and our work with the Social Pillar Action Plan that we discussed today. There's a strong focus on the skills. And here I want to reflect on the question that was out there for young people, having a chance to access the labor market. Here, indeed, this concept of training on the job, so what we call the dual vocational training, is indeed the best. Why is it so? First of all, these young people get the theoretical skill. They are being paid while being trained. But the interesting part is in the small and medium companies, they are being trained on what the company needs specifically. And they get to know that young person. So they know how he or she acts in the workforce environment. Therefore, the probability is way higher that they are then being hired after having finished their dual vocational training. That's point number one, where we always see that it is successful. The second point is very clear if you look at the large labor market characteristics. Young people do have a chance where they have a strong representation through, for example, the trade unions, that they have decent jobs at the beginning. The more rigid a labor market is, in other words, the less it allows young people to enter the labor market with good jobs and good payment and good contracts, the worse it is, because they are always the first who are being fired the moment there is a problem. So here there are good benchmarks in the European Union to see what flexibility means, flexibility within the social frame that our social market economy is all about. And there is a third point I really also want to pick up again. It has been mentioned. That is the topic of women being part of the workforce. If you look at numbers, in 2019, when we had a really good year of employment, we had an average employment rate of 73% all over Europe. But if you look at men and women, it was 78% men and 63% only of women being part of the workforce. And there is indeed a clear, you see, huge differences between member states. And the crucial question is the question of reconciliation of work and family. And here, the concept of how you look at family and children and career is so important. If you're able to say care and career goes together, then it works better. The crucial point is it goes not only for mothers, but also for fathers. So the respect that a man who has children wants to have time to be a father, as a woman who has children wants to have time to be a mother, but they both also need time to have a career. And this goes together with good parental payment and parental leave at the very beginning, but then a good offer of childcare, high-quality childcare, schools that are good schools, so that time for learning for the children is there, and children need other children's, but time for the parents to have their career too, but also on the employer side, working family-friendly schemes that are possible. And this combination, if you look over time in the different economies in the European Union, where this model is being realized, there you see a way higher proportion of women being part of the workforce and actually having more children. So if we look at the future, and we have, thanks God, a very well-educated young generation of men and women, and if they want to take over responsibility, the best thing that can happen to us is if we enable it to them to have children, but also to have their own, to earn their own income. That would be the way I would suggest to go.
Thank you very much, President von der Leyen, for making especially that last very important point, I say as a politician, but definitely also as a mother. I'm quickly going to go to the questions of the members of the European Parliament, and I take all three of them together. Please clearly say to whom your question is addressed, and I start with Lydia Pereira.
Thank you very much, Esther, and thanks to Madam President, dear Prime Minister Mitsotakis, and of course, Chairman Manfred Weber. Thank you very much for this discussion. We are currently facing a very severe economic recession, and let me emphasize this. It is the second economic crisis in 10 years for my generation, and so it's very reassuring to see three European leaders giving a few words on their vision for including the youth in the process for the transition that we will have to go through, as well as in the economic recovery. And although the vaccination plans started all over Europe, we have no guarantee to return to normality. With the different programs like the Next Generation EU, the MFF, the SURE programs and other instruments, we are already leading a strong and ambitious fiscal and budgetary common effort. And I think this is already a great historical legacy of this Commission under the President Ursula von der Leyen and her leadership. But our main priority must be the economic recovery on the basis of the twins, the green transition, the digital transition, with a clear commitment to the social dimension of all policies. And the aim is indeed, as the title of this conference says, create jobs, and that only can come from with the economic growth. So my question is focused on the real outcome of the European instruments linked to the Next Generation EU, in particular the Recovery and Resilience Facility. On the one hand, the Next Generation EU was decided last summer, before the second and the third waves of the pandemic. So do you believe that the financial envelope will be sufficient for the challenges that lie ahead? And on the other hand, we have to make sure that all this money gets to the real economy and we don't use it only for national administrations. And so I would like to question President von der Leyen, how do you see the RRF national plans' role in this regard? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Stelios Kimperopoulos, please, can you be short, because the President of the Commission is under time pressure, understandably. Stelios.
Thank you, Esther. Mr. Prime Minister, Madam President, Europe, our home, is faced with unprecedented economic and social challenges, as you all have pointed out. Thousands of businesses and fellow citizens have been suffering the consequences of the pandemic. Our union and individual member states, such as my home country, Greece, through a number of bold decisions, have managed to preserve jobs and reduce such impact. But in this challenge, political climate, creating quality jobs will be key for a number of reasons. It will be fundamental in order to safeguard social cohesion, not only in our capitals, but also in remote rural areas and islands, and also in order to ensure that our talented workforce remains in Europe and that we can harness the incredible opportunities of the digital and green transitions. But ultimately, it will be a test for our citizens' trust in our common project. And this is not something that we cannot take for granted. I wanted therefore to ask you, what are the key elements in order to create quality jobs to the benefit of our citizens, and with a significant emphasis on our SMEs, micro SMEs, youth and vulnerable groups of our society?
Thank you so much, Stelios. And then finally, Markus Ferber.
Very much, Esther. My question goes as well to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. I really appreciate what has been said as a father of a young boy as well, as fathers are in responsibility as well, not only mothers. But honestly, when we speak about creating jobs, we have to safeguard the existing jobs as well. And if I think on Green Deal and Euro 7, I have some doubts whether we have it in mind. If I think on digitalization, buying hardware in the US, buying software in United States, in China, sorry, hardware in China, software in US, and doing data protection in Europe is not creating jobs well. So what can we really do as legislators to safeguard existing jobs and give a chance for creating new jobs? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So a question regarding the RRF, is the envelope big enough and does it go into the real economy? And how do we make sure that the Green Deal also creates jobs in Europe and not on the other side of the world? I think those were the two central questions to the Commission President, who is hopefully still with us. So I'm going to start with Ursula von der Leyen.
Yes, of course, I'm still with you. Yeah, Lydia, thank you very much for your question. Indeed, you referred to the first crisis and now the second economic crisis. Of course, completely different reasons for what we were in this crisis. But let's look back to the last crisis. There, the approach was an intergovernmental agreement. And as always in crisis, you have the economic downturn with the necessity at the same time to do structural reforms. And so you have this very difficult combination with the reduction of investment and the necessity of reforms. And having learned from the last crisis, this time we did it differently. We said, first of all, during the crisis, let's do everything to keep skilled labor in the enterprises. This is the SURE program, which is really successful, so that the small and medium enterprises, for example, do not lay off their workers. But when we have overcome the crisis and the first orders come again, they are in place, they have the capacities to take orders, and therefore immediately start again to work, because the skilled labor is in the company, in the enterprise. And there's a second thing we did together differently this time. This time on the European level, indeed, we raise money on the capital market, the Next Generation EU, to invest, but also to reform. And this combination, to do reforms that are necessary, as written down in the European semester, so the country-specific recommendations, while having a strong investment, gives a huge opportunity to come out better and differently from this crisis. And so we are now, you were asking where the national recovery and resilient recovery plans are. It's all work in progress. But a fascinating work, because you see all these ideas on the green topic, on the digital topic, and of course we have to push on the reforms that do come with the investment. What is important from the Commission side here is to make sure that besides very good projects on the national level, we have the overarching European projects, so cross-border projects, where you combine different member states together and you convene them behind one project, like the hydrogen project is an example for that. This also goes, Markus Ferber, to the question of the overarching projects that are really boosting our economy into the future necessities. For example, in the digital sector, we are working hard now as a Commission to make sure that in the recovery plans, we always have integrated the question of the infrastructure like 5G or 6G. The two of us know what we're talking about, what the speedy internet is concerned everywhere that you have access to it. Or, for example, we are working on the question of data, indeed, but in a way that we know that our industry has a huge amount of data they are collecting on a daily basis, of which 80% are never, ever being used. So how do we store safely and give access to these data to all these young people who want to be entrepreneurs and can do a lot with this data that otherwise are just being wasted? Is the other question we are answering now with the investment through a Gaia-X based European cloud approach. So these are two examples that show that on the European level, you can create the infrastructure that is necessary, that you boost the digitalization in the member states in an overarching concept, and not only with the national view on the project that are certainly important, but do not have the European brand. And what the European Green Deal is concerned, I think here, if our industry knows that the trend is going very clearly in the direction that you need sustainable and clean production processes. We are a world champion. We're leading in the world what innovative technologies in this sector is concerned. But we also know that the others are not sleeping. So they are catching up, and they are all investing in that area. Therefore, this combination that we invest heavily, that new innovative technologies are being helped to be market feasible, this is at the moment being the most difficult step, is one goal of the investment. Of course, we know that they need a certain protection, so that's the reason why we're talking about a carbon border adjustment mechanism that is WTO compatible. But I'm deeply convinced, if I watch the United States, for example, but also if I watch China, they are already very strongly investing in that topic, that it's for us crucial, if we want to stay world leader, and if we want to really be the driver of this innovative trend, that it's the right time now to invest in the European Green Deal in this sense, to make it our new growth strategy.
Thank you very much, President von der Leyen. And I think we can also turn with that question to Prime Minister Kyriakos, I was going to say. Sorry for that. First name basis here. The question about the Green Deal. And you talked about your power plants in one region of Greece that you closed down effectively, or going to close. How do you, on a national level, actually make sure that the new jobs you are creating, you talked about them, are staying in Greece? I'm sure it's a challenge for all of us. It's a discussion we have in the Netherlands, and you must have in Greece. How do you deal with that?
Well, first of all, we also intend to bring some jobs into Greece from abroad. And that is why we try to make Greece competitive when it comes to attracting foreign direct investment. We know that we need to be offering a competitive landscape when it comes to regulation and taxes, and at the same time also make sure that we leverage our comparative advantages. When it comes to creating and retaining jobs locally, one should be aware that not all jobs obviously are going to be replaced by robots and algorithms, especially if you look, for example, at your service industry, which is so important for countries such as Greece, quite dependent on tourism. We need to be aware that these can be good paying jobs that can be sustained and can be improved through technology, but not necessarily replaced through technology. So at the end of the day, for those jobs that will be lost, that will be really lost through the green transition, one really needs to do, as there are very detailed work, at the local level, to really think hard in what context these jobs can actually be replaced by other jobs. And this will mean, obviously, that people will need to be trained to do different things. And it also requires a willingness by people to engage in that thought process and take the initiative. You may have, people who are in their middle age, and it's not always easy to convince them that this is something doable. That is where government support is probably the most necessary. So you have to do this job, at the very, very detailed level. But the RRF provides us with the basic framework and the financing tools in order to be able to do that. And I would very much encourage Ursula. I mean, she knows our views to make sure that the plans are approved as quickly as possible. This also relates to the question that was answered previously, so that the money can actually be channeled into our economies as quickly as possible. If things go according to plan, we'll be receiving 4 billion in 2021. It is absolutely instrumental that there are no delays, because if there are delays, then the risk that jobs may be lost as we move out of the pandemic is going to increase significantly.
Indeed, and that is our wish as well. And we're working very hard here in the EPP Group in the European Parliament to make sure that the RRF will soon really have concrete implementation. That is all we have time for in terms of the questions and answers, and I give back to Jack.
Thanks, Esther. Yeah, so thank you so much to Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and EPP Group Leader Manfred Weber for joining us on this panel. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate everybody that's been watching online, and to the members who asked their questions.
Yes, and then, Jack, we can move on. We heard from the European level, we heard from the national level, but now we're going to take a look at a short video message from Rafał Trzaskowski, who's the mayor of Warsaw and a former MEP from our EPP group, of course.
Rebuilding economies after a pandemic crisis is our biggest challenge. If we manage to combine it with reforms that will create new jobs, we will also succeed in building citizens' trust in Europe. As the mayor of Warsaw, I'm convinced that both the European Green Deal and the digital transformation are the right answer to society's expectations. However, winning the citizens over to the project of a new green and digital union requires two things from us. Firstly, we must effectively combat the coronavirus pandemic by accelerating the rate of vaccination and building up the union's immune system against possible new outbreaks. As long as our society's greatest concern is the prospect of further lockdowns and the social and economic consequences, faith in Europe might wane. Secondly, the reconstruction project must be backed up by financial resources. The Recovery Fund, in conjunction with the MFF, is a great opportunity to show that Europe is not an abstract entity but works for the benefit of each and every citizen. However, we must ensure that citizens are aware of where and how much reconstruction funding is coming from the Union. That applies both to the poor regions with high unemployment rates and to those regions with higher levels of development. The coronavirus pandemic has hit everyone, including urban areas, large cities, centers of culture and science, where services and trade dominate. May I remind us all that urban areas provide a home to 72% of the EU's population. 41% of Europeans live in cities and 31% in towns and suburbs. To give you an example, the Polish capital region accounts for almost 1/5 of the entire Polish GDP. It is hard to imagine a green, digital and reform-driven recovery of Poland's economy without Warsaw's participation in the Next Generation Fund. But Warsaw citizens may not see the effects of Europe's financing in economy in their daily lives. Therefore, we need a fair and transparent consultation process leading to a just division of Next Generation Fund that does not discriminate citizens on the ground of the place of living. Only in that way we will meet the European priorities together.
As we're now coming to the end of our event, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Christian Ehler. He's the EPP Group Coordinator in the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy, to draw together all the threads of today's conversation and give us his vision for moving forward.
Thank you. What a challenge. I think given what we strive today, I think the most important message is this is not a one-day stand. The EPP is going to continue that, and we'll do continuously several upcoming roundtables on this issue, because I think that's important to understand, given the complexity of the issue we had today. I think what we have seen and what was almost a political message from the industry, interestingly, when asked on jobs and perspective, they were appealing to unity. They were appealing to the European idea, to the common market, to a younger generation looking beyond national borders. And I think that had been almost a political message, but it seems to be an important aspect of the question where the jobs would come from. They will come from a united Europe, from a European common market as a base for global competition. And the second message obviously had been innovation. That goes through practically all what had been said today. I think innovation and an innovative Europe is key to the job question. I mean, we want to preserve our social model, which is obviously an expensive one. We want to preserve labor rights, union rights. In order to establish that, in order to be able to go on with that European social model, innovation is key. What's also obvious that although the COVID crisis is obviously hitting the labor market quite drastically, I think it's obvious that profound trends have been playing out on the continent in the recent years and will continue to do so in the future. And I name just a few. The growth of automation adoption, which we haven't strived yet. The increase of geographic concentration of employment, another issue, the question, the balance between the countryside and the metropolitan areas. The geographic, the shrinkage of the labor supply, something we haven't touched. I mean, we create this impression that the jobs of the future generation is in danger, but given the fact that, for example, in Germany, more than 50% of the given workforce are 60 or beyond. In Sweden, it's even more than that. We are going to see that on the one hand, we have to create a perspective for the younger generation, but on the other hand, we are going to be challenged by the shrinkage of the labor supply in Europe and skilled workers. We are facing a shift of mix of sectors and occupations. And I think mega trends like digitalization, globalization, migration, climate change, and an aging population will also fundamentally change the world of work in Europe. So what are the lessons to choose? On the one hand, I think we all understand right now that we have a almost transformative decade ahead. Given our ambitions and the needs also in terms of CO2 reduction, we're going to see that the classical industry has to change. And that is related on the one hand, obviously, to threats, job losses. I mean, just 1/3 of the employment in the automotive industry is related to combustion engines. On the other hand, there's a lot of potential with the Green Deal because we live out of our patent stock about innovation, and it's a challenge and from my point of view also a job and growth factor that we are now seeking for new technologies in order to achieve that. We had been talking about digitalization that is very much related also to the question that we are talking about a way of jobs which might not even exist today, but will be defining the future job market in the digital sector. So in consequence, we have to talk about lifelong learning, about educational schemes, which had been addressed by Ursula von der Leyen. And when we are desperately looking for jobs, as it had been a little bit the given line of conversation, I mean, there is potential, obviously. I mean, just you look to the German figure on the health and social care sector, the contribution in the future might be 4.5 million additional jobs. STEM, so the mathematics, information technology, science and digital technologies, additional 2.6 million jobs. The educational sector, additional 2 million jobs. The development towards platform work and issues like that. I mean, there is growth potential in terms of job, but it all will depend to some extent on the question of innovation. Jobs and innovation, that's the link in Europe. And I think that is a pattern we should follow. But also we have to be responsible about as I said, the relationship between the countryside and the concentrated metropolitan areas. And yes, also EPP has to think about how to secure the European way of life, workers' rights. We don't want to end in an Americanized digital economy where nobody is really employed and social securities are at stake. So I think there are challenges ahead. We saw the potential, but I think the important message is the EPP has understood that. That's just the starting point, and we're going to follow that. That will be one of the most important issues, as Manfred Weber had been saying, for the future work of the EPP in the next years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Ehler. So with this, we're going to start wrapping up our EPP Group Jobs, Jobs, Jobs event. Firstly, thank you so much to the Commission President, the Greek Prime Minister, the Voices from Industry, Manfred Weber. Thank you to everybody who's watched online and participated, to the MEPs who gave their comments. Thank you for putting up with me after Richard Quest from CNN's connection dropped with us, so I've been standing in for him. I think really, overall, there's been some actually relatively hopeful messages out of this event, Esther.
Yes, indeed. And it has been interesting and, like you said, eventful. Definitely keep following the EPP Group and use the hashtag Jobs, Jobs, Jobs to continue the conversation with us online. And make sure that you follow the EPP Group accounts on Facebook, on Instagram, Twitter and on YouTube. From Manfred Weber and from myself here, from all of us in the European Parliament, thank you very much for watching and goodbye. Stay safe.